the underground bunker was quiet in a strange and heavy way. The silence was not peaceful. It felt thick, like the air itself was tired. Deep beneath the ruined city, Adolf Hitler sat in a small room with low ceilings and dim lights. The world above him was falling apart, and he knew it. For years, he had spoken with loud confidence. He had shouted promises of victory, power, and control. But now his voice was softer, weaker, and often filled with anger and fear. The sound of distant explosions reached the bunker walls, shaking the ground again and again. Each sound was a reminder that the end was near. Hitler's health had changed greatly. His body no longer matched the image he once wanted the world to see. His hands shook. His back was bent. His face looked older than his age. He moved slowly, dragging his feet through narrow hallways. People around him noticed these changes, but no one spoke openly. Fear still lived in the bunker. Even as hope disappeared, the bunker itself felt like a small, dark world cut off from reality. Long corridors connected tiny rooms. The air smelled of damp concrete and old metal. Electric lights flickered, sometimes going dark for a moment before returning. Everyone inside knew that escape was almost impossible. The city above was surrounded, and the enemy was closing in from all sides. Hitler still held meetings, but they were no longer about real plans. Maps were spread across tables, but the armies marked on them no longer existed. He gave orders that could not be followed. Some officers tried to correct him gently. Others stayed silent. A few still believed in him, but many had already accepted the truth in their hearts. Late in the day, Hitler spent time with Eva Braun. She had stayed with him even as others fled. She tried to bring small moments of normal life into the bunker. Sometimes she smiled. Sometimes she spoke about memories from better days. But even she could not hide the fear in her eyes. She understood that this place was not just a shelter. It was a final hiding place. Food was simple and scarce. Meals were eaten quietly. People avoided looking at each other for too long. Some whispered to one another in corners. Others stared at the floor. Everyone felt the weight of history pressing down on them, even if they did not fully understand it. As the hours passed, Hitler's mood changed often. At times he seemed calm, almost distant. At other moments, he exploded in anger, blaming others for failure. He spoke of betrayal. He spoke of enemies both outside and within. These emotional storms left everyone exhausted. In private moments, Hitler dictated messages. Secretaries typed as he spoke, their fingers moving quickly, their faces tense. These words were meant to explain his actions and place blame on others. He wanted to control the story, even at the very end. He believed history would listen to him. Outside the bunker, Berlin was no longer the city it once was. Buildings lay in ruins. Smoke filled the streets. Fires burned without anyone left to put them out. Soldiers and civilians alike faced fear, hunger, and loss. The sound of battle never stopped. It echoed like a heartbeat that refused to slow down. Inside, time seemed strange. Without sunlight or fresh air, day and night blended together. Clocks ticked, but they felt meaningless. Each moment felt heavy, stretched, and uncertain. People wondered how much longer the bunker would last. They wondered how much longer Hitler would last. In one quiet moment, Hitler sat alone. He looked at the walls around him, walls that had become his entire world. Once, he had imagined standing above crowds, shaping the future. Now, he was hiding underground, listening to the collapse of everything he had built. He spoke softly about death, about loyalty, about fate. Some listeners nodded, though their eyes showed doubt. Others felt numb. They were no longer thinking about ideology or power. They were thinking about survival, escape, or simply the end of fear. Eva stayed close to him. She tried to offer comfort, but comfort was hard to find. The bunker felt colder as time passed, even though the temperature had not changed. Hope had drained away, leaving only waiting. As the sounds of battle grew louder, it became clear to everyone that the end was approaching. Not just the end of a war, but the end of an era filled with violence and destruction. The man who had once controlled millions now controlled nothing beyond the walls of a bunker, and so the final hours moved forward, slowly and heavily, carrying with them fear, regret, and the weight of history. What happened next would seal his fate forever. The bunker felt smaller as time moved forward. The walls seemed to press closer, and the air felt heavier with every breath. Everyone inside could sense that the final moment was near. There was no more pretending. No more false hope. Only waiting. Hitler no longer walked through the bunker with confidence. His steps were slow and uneven. His shoulders were bent, and his eyes looked tired and distant. The man who once spoke for hours without stopping now struggled to finish a sentence. His voice was quiet, sometimes shaking, sometimes flat, as if emotion had drained away. The sounds from above were louder now. Explosions shook dust from the ceiling. The bunker lights flickered again and again. Each sound felt closer than before. Some people covered their ears. Others simply stared at the walls, counting breaths, trying to stay calm. Hitler called a small group of people together. They stood in a narrow room, listening as he spoke. His words were no longer about victory. They were about loyalty, about endings, about history. He thanked some of them for staying. His tone was strange, almost polite, as if he were already saying goodbye. Eva Braun stood beside him. She was quiet, but her face showed determination. She had chosen to stay, even when escape might have been possible earlier. She wore simple clothes and tried to appear calm, but her hands trembled slightly. She knew what was coming. And she had accepted it. Later, a short and private ceremony took place inside the bunker. There was no celebration. No music. No happiness. Only silence and seriousness. Hitler and Eva were together, bound by a decision that could not be undone. For those who witnessed it, the moment felt unreal, like something happening in a dream. Afterward, Hitler returned to his room. He spent time going through personal items. Some papers were organized carefully. Others were destroyed. He wanted no mistakes, no confusion. He wanted control until the final moment. Even now, he believed that order mattered. People in the bunker avoided his room unless called. They whispered to one another in low voices. Some cried quietly. Others felt empty. A few were angry. Everyone understood that history was closing a dark chapter, but they were still trapped inside it. Hitler ate very little. He spoke less and less. When he did speak, his words were often about the past. He talked about choices, about enemies, about how things could have been different. But there was no true regret, only bitterness and blame. Eva stayed with him. She tried to offer comfort with simple words and presence. There was nothing else she could give. The bunker had stripped everything down to its most basic emotions: fear, loyalty, exhaustion, and acceptance. As time passed, Hitler made his final decision. It was quiet. There was no dramatic announcement. Those closest to him understood what was about to happen. They felt a mix of relief and dread. Relief that the waiting would end. Dread about what would come after the door to his room closed. Silence filled the hallway. People stood still, listening. The explosions above continued, but inside the bunker, time seemed to pause. Then, the moment passed, when the door was opened again. The world had changed. Adolf Hitler was gone. Eva Braun was gone. The man who had shaped so much destruction was no longer alive. There were no speeches. No cheers. Only quiet movement and heavy breathing. The orders he had given earlier were followed carefully. His body and Eva's body were carried outside the bunker through broken paths and ruins. The city above was barely recognizable. Smoke filled the air. The ground was covered in debris. Fire burned nearby. What happened next was done quickly and without ceremony. There was no grave, no marker, no place for memory. The intention was clear. Nothing should remain that could become a symbol. Afterward, those who returned to the bunker felt empty. Some sat down and stared at the floor. Others moved automatically, following routines that no longer mattered. Leadership had vanished. Purpose had vanished. Only survival remained. The bunker itself felt different. The fear that had ruled it for so long slowly faded, replaced by uncertainty. Without Hitler, the walls were just walls. The rooms were just rooms. The power that once lived there was gone. Soon, new footsteps echoed through the bunker. The war in the city reached its final moments. Soldiers entered. The hidden world beneath the ground was discovered. What had been secret was secret no longer. For the world outside, the news spread quickly. The war in Europe was coming to an end. Cities would begin to rebuild. Survivors would try to heal. History would begin the long work of understanding and remembering. The story of Adolf Hitler's last hours is not a story of glory. It is a story of collapse. It shows how power built on hatred and fear ends in isolation and silence. It reminds us that actions have consequences. And history never forgets. For English learners, this story is also a lesson in understanding the past through language. Listening to history helps us understand the present. Learning through stories helps us remember not just words, but meaning. I share stories like this every day. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.